Hi there, and welcome to this week's weekly RV report for the week of Friday, June 20th, 2025. Almost out of another month. Hard to believe. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it. If you are new to the podcast, as always, please do like, subscribe, and share so the channel can grow and others can gain in the knowledge you're being afforded. As always, as a standard disclaimer, I am not a financial advisor, nor is this constituted as financial advice. This is merely quality information being shared with you to use for your own personal discernment. That being said, starting, of course, with the nation of Iraq, now that the widely anticipated attacks from Israel on the Iranian nuclear power plants and uranium-enriched sites have begun, we are awaiting the grave surrender from Iran as phase two. President Trump has formally announced that in 2 weeks or less, he will decide whether or not to engage in attacks against Iran. Well, as we posted on our Telegram this week, according to Intel, Slava, and PIR on Telegram, both are announcing that attacks could ensue as early as Saturday. It will most likely be the element of surprise, as it was a week ago when the attacks began. Once phase two of the grave surrender of Iran is complete, we need to be watching, in our humble opinion, for a new Fed chair, aka Judy Shelton or Scott Bessent, who will be running it from the Treasury side. That, coupled with lower interest rates, should send the markets soaring down on a downward trajectory. Meanwhile, peace deals will be made optically, and regime changes in both Iraq and Iran will take place, and the sanctions on Iran will be summarily lifted. This will bring the peace and prosperity to both nations for a short period of time. And we will see a suddenly why now moment, per the late great Kim Clement, on the release of said dinar. Also, please, folks, don't ask us what we think about the dates of July 9th or any of that stuff. We don't do dates. We're just giving you condition-based events as we see the key markers in order to see what we're all expecting and anticipating to occur. We also, it's our humble opinion that it will be Judy Shelton, which will be the Fed/Treasury chair, because you'll recall that President Trump sort of floated her out there in his first term in a swamp situation in the deep state to see how they would respond. And she almost got a 50% vote back then. So now, with that pretty much out of the way, it should make her the clear front runner in our opinion. On the Vietnam front, no major news to report other than that they are clearly storing up their gold reserves in order to tokenize a digital gold coin, as well as the digital dinar and the digital dong and paper dong that are being queued up behind the scenes. And yes, Iraq will be going all digital, but they will still take our paper currency. So no need to be concerned either way, whichever you're holding. Here, let me show you a couple slides here now for posterity, as we typically do. On the Nasara Jassar front here, you'll note that a new Vatican report authorized by the Commission of Leading Global Economists and Experts calls for urgent global debt relief to address the escalating crisis of development and climate change, quote unquote. The Jubilee report highlights 54 developing countries now spending over 10% of their tax revenues on interest payments and diverting critical resources away from health, education, and other things. The report urges systematic reforms. Let me bring this down so you can see it, including fair debt restructuring and a reimagining of global finance. Also, it's important to note that the new Pope Francis XIV, declared 2025 a Jubilee year, focusing on, here's the key word, debt forgiveness and justice. Under his leadership, the Vatican continues to champion debt relief as a, quote, moral imperative and a practical step towards global equity and sustainability. In layman's terms, AKA a clear and present Jassaracom. Yes, we know the Vatican was corrupt, but they no longer are in charge or have the power or leverage they once had. And also, before we go to the next set of slides, let's just finish up here on the other fronts with Zimbabwe. Nelson Chamisa, as you know, is back in the spotlight as he blasts the corrupt regime over there. Per the article that we shared on this week's podcast with Mark Z, Chamisa is putting them on notice that the wealth of the wicked is essentially being stored up for the righteous, and that they will no longer be able to rape and pillage the land and resources from the Zimbabwean people, and that regime change is indeed imminent. Now let's turn our attention to some of the other slides, as I mentioned. I'm going to show you a couple things here. Interestingly enough, a shout out to Jassara News for this quote on CNBC. Fed Governor Waller says that central bank could cut rates as early as July. Well, what a coincidence, quote unquote, as we know there are none in a kingdom of heaven, because if we go over here, we can see that the Genius Act, which was passed, by the way, and let's talk about that. It passed on Tuesday. It has major implications for both the crypto as well as the global reset, all one and the same. The vote passed by the Senate by a vote of 68-30, with 18 Democrats joining most Republicans in favor. Just 2 Republicans, Rand Paul of Kentucky and Josh Hawley of Missouri, voted against it. And here's the aforementioned slide. As of July 14th, as you can see, the ISO 20022 is being set up for activation on July 14th. It's important to denote that's about 3.5 months ahead of schedule, what they were talking about in November, because they always had the date in mind. Without the Genius Act fully passing and the Trump signing, there would be no currency RV or RI. The House will hopefully move quick and do a clean Genius Act, get on my desk ASAP with no delays or add-ons. And we also have the big, beautiful bill coming up the rear by or before the 4th of July, which is amazingly less than 2 weeks away. So a lot will be revealed, folks, over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Let me go to the next one here. This is, you can do with this information if whatever you like. AMG News is reporting that monetary reset is here. Federal Reserve era quietly terminated as sovereign system goes. But what we can look into that as the grip on the NATO grip on the stronghold of the world has pretty much lessened. The European Union will be isolated with them and have to make hard choices. We in America certainly will not be compliant with that. And that's the thing that's the overriding factor. With the Fed now talking about cutting rates, that's a surefire way to throw the old system off the proverbial cliff. And we'll just segue a natural transition into the old/new US note and be backed by, of course, precious metals. We also see President Trump here in the coming weeks, we'll say, I'll leave that open-ended for your discernment, to audit the Fort Knox and then audit the Fed, which he'll get buy-in from the people in conjunction with the big, beautiful bill. And that's how he's going to take down the private Western Central Bank, remove the 14th Amendment, and a whole host of other things. This is interesting on the XRP front. Brett on X is saying that XRP could soar to 10,000 by 2027. Personally, we think it's just our own personal speculation. We think it's going to be much higher than that, much sooner. But we know, all of us who are in XRP know what great potentiality this coin really has once it's able to flourish and is removed in corruption. So with the now Genius Act being passed, that should hasten the final optical settlement between the SEC and Ripple, now with Paul Atkins fully in support, and that should move this thing forward pretty quickly. Interesting little side note, folks, putting pieces together. An earthquake hits near Iran's Fordo site, 2.5, so it's not very high, but Japan the other day had a 5.9. So what we think is happening is that Iran has moved a lot of their nuclear sites underground, just like we have here in America, China and Russia and many other nations have. So they're following suit from what we can see. So they've moved it down below ground. So what might be happening are peripheral DUMS attacks. Remember, deep underground military bases. We most likely think they're going to do, meaning Israel will do underground attacks on those bases to get ahead of it. What they're planning to do to infiltrate it and force their grave surrender, per Kim Clement. So that's something we thought was at least noteworthy. And then on the Fed side, we were talking about that. Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama calls for Fed Chair Powell to be fired. But what's interesting is he's not the only one. If I stop the slide here and just give me a second and we go to the next one, you will see that there's pressure on multiple fronts. Mike Lee, Senator of Utah, is also pushing to end the Fed and in the process, remove Jerome Powell. And here's the other site here. Jerome Powell's not been right about anything. According to C3 on X, he's just another deep state weapon. And the coup against President Trump, he won't cut rates because it will help Trump, traitor. So remember, President Trump has the Federal Reserve Act, Article 10, whereby he can remove a Fed chair if the president deems malfeasance, and we all know that's there. And again, this is a coordinated effort. But as you see the pieces coming together, it's extremely encouraging for us, we believe, in the near future, and of course the long term as well. Now, finishing up on the precious metals commodity side, as of the time of this broadcast, which for those of you who are interested in such things, you can see the day and time in which we've recorded, so that we're being transparent with you as always. Crude oil is trading at this moment at $73.32. Gold is holding steadily around $3,371.10, and silver down slightly from its all-time high, 37 to 36.04. But what's interesting is the dollar index is now leveraging around $98.54, just slightly up from its low of 97.85 several days ago. So it's all just sort of in a holding pattern, waiting for these pieces to transact and intersect to get to the place that we're all eagerly anticipating. So hold the line, keep the faith, put your trust in God, not in me or anyone else. and he will navigate you through to the finish line. And we will do our best to help God's giving people, as always, cross the finish line together. So that wraps it up for this week's RV report. As always, anything breaks, grave surrender, so forth, we'll bring it to you post haste. God bless. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Goodbye for now.